Great. And our next guest today we have is President and CEO of Graphite One, symbol GPH on the TSX Venture Board and GPHOF on the OTC board. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Arlen. It's a real pleasure to be back.
Yeah, right on. Graphite One is developing one of the largest graphite deposits in the United States, as recognized by the USGS. Anthony, your team has sure put out some incredible news over the last year as they push this asset forward with strategic investments and government funding. Anthony's been at that for a very long time, very tenacious, and has built some very strong relationships with the right government bodies to see this asset move forward. So with that, Anthony, I'll let you give a 20-minute presentation. We had a few questions come in already when people registered for the show, and so we'll fire through those when you're done.
Awesome. Thank you, Arlen. Well, it's a real pleasure to be back at the annual Kinvestor conference and to speak with all of you today at the Kinvestor 2024 Critical Minerals and Mining. So much has happened for G1 since we last got together last March. There was so much in process that I could not disclose at that time. So today I've got a lot of ground to cover. So please note the safe harbor slide at the onset. Arlen's team will also be posting my slides today at the Kin site. So you can click through at your leisure to our truly talented management slide. You can move to the next one, which we continue to build out as we work towards completion of our feasibility study and our anode manufacturing facility. There's also a snapshot of our cap table. And of course, I'm happy to provide more quantitative detail on request. I call those our who and how slides. And don't get me wrong, having the right team with the right experience and the right plan is critical. T is a word that's a perfect fit when we're talking about graphite. Who and how are essential, but to make great things happen, who and how aren't always enough. You need to know the why it matters, no matter what it is. Great things happen when your why aligns with the trends and transformations shaping our world and the generations ahead. That's why I'm convinced the G1 is really at an inflection point today, because graphite is a critical mineral for the renewable energy revolution. Next slide. The electrification of everything. Arthur Clarke, the great futurist, had a saying, any sufficiently developed technology appears first as magic. Our minds don't naturally ask, what makes that technology work? In the case of lithium-ion batteries, like that Elon Musk quote about graphite on my slides, we don't think of graphite as the indispensable technology material. We just take graphite for granted. And the fact that we take graphite for granted, that we don't make the connection between the materials that make this possible and the magic of the devices we use, this is okay, because that's their market opportunity. That's what makes G1 such a great bet as investors like all of you, as we arbitrage our knowledge of how this new world of ours works. And there's another part of the why that drives us. Because if you think of the materials we need to make this new world, there's obviously the disconnect. Graphite is everywhere. But in the US right now, and for the last 30 years, you can't get graphite anywhere. There's a graphite crisis. Next slide. Start at the top left. Oh, sorry. Go back to the last one. Apologies. 100%. That's how much the US graphite the US has to import today. Another way of saying production right now is at zero. Move to 70%. That's how much of the world's supply is coming out of China. How is the US going to compete in this new technology shaping our world? Are we going to be a maker or a taker? Able to build what we need here or buying it from a country that wants to take America's place in the world? Did you notice when China announced they'll put tight export controls on graphite? China knows it's critical. You don't need to tell me how dangerous that is. Depending on foreign sources of supply, in a world where adversaries can use materials access as an economic weapon, it's just not tenable. And when you have a deposit like Graphite Creek, it's more than untenable. It's irresponsible. I want to talk about American competitiveness, about American manufacturing, about equipping the American military with the most advanced weapon systems in the world. How is that going to work with zero graphite production? Back to the numbers. 95%. That's how much graphite is in the typical battery anode. You can't make one without graphite, and a lot of it. How much? 495%. That's the World Bank's projection of how much more graphite the world will need by 2050. 2,500% and 15 to 1. Those are the other snapshots of how much graphite we are going to need. It's a crisis. There's no other word for it. But let me get back to that first 100% for a moment and back to our why. Because as complicated as it is to begin production of a mineral that hasn't been mined for more than a generation, and to create the downstream supply chain to process that mineral into advanced forms, and ultimately to recycle that material for recovery and reuse, it's the why that animates us at Graphite One. Our answer to 100% US dependency is Graphite One's 100% US-based supply chain. Next slide. Our anchor is our Graphite Creek deposit, north of Nome. The U.S. Geological Survey calls it the largest natural graphite deposit in the U.S. And the USGS came back in 2023 to add, and I quote, among the largest in the world. And we've only explored a little over 1 square kilometer along our 16-kilometer deposit. Before too long, we're going to update our resource after a strong drilling season last year. But even now, I can tell you that Graphite Creek is a national asset in its own right, a generational resource that's going to provide a critical mineral throughout the 21st century. But even as a generational resource, it's not enough by itself, because securing access to the 21st century tech material is not just about supply, it's about the supply chain. Next slide. Today, we just announced a major step, the step selection for the second link in our supply chain. Graphite One will build its anode active material manufacturing facility in Niles, Ohio. Ironically, we've chosen the site of the old Warren Depot, the former U.S. National Defense Stockpile, which for the last 50 years included the DoD's graphite stockpile, which is, of course, no more. You'll hear more related to this new development in coming weeks and months, so stay tuned. But G1's supply chain strategy is just taking shape. Next slide. It's building on the major U.S. government grant we received last July from the Department of Defense under the Defense Production Act 3, Title 3, after graphite was designated, and I quote, essential to the national defense. We received $37.5 million to help G1 cut at least a year off of our feasibility study timeline. We made a great use of the DoD funding to more than quadruple our 2023 drilling program compared to 2022. And as a result, we're on track to complete our feasibility on the DoD timetable by the end of this year. You can listen to Senator Lisa Murkowski in the U.S. Congress. She's one of the thought leaders on critical minerals. Talk about the importance of our G1 grant on the Senate floor. Next slide. I couldn't have said it any better. Next slide. The DoD grant was the first of 2 G1 grants received just this last year. Our second grant came in September from the Defense Logistics Agency, which is overseen of the National Defense Stockpile. Don't let the smaller dollar amount, the $4.7 million, fool you. This grant to develop a graphite-based foam fire suppressant to meet the congressional mandate to replace the incumbent firefighting material, which is dangerous to human health and the environment, is an important reminder that advanced graphite materials are important well beyond the EV and energy storage system sectors. Arthur Clarke was right. New technologies appear first as a form of magic, and graphite is a truly magical material. Next slide. In terms of strategic support from key investors, Graphite One is grateful to have an investment from the Bering Straits Native Corporation. As you see in Dan Graham's quote, the president of Bering Straits Native Corporation, their unanimous board decision stems from their interest in being part of the clean energy transition. Remember the why. G1 matters. Next slide. As you know, we've had great support from Governor Dunleavy for G1, from Senator Murkowski, who has elevated the critical minerals issue in the Senate, from Senator Sullivan, who serves on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and Alaska's Congresswoman Mary Platola, successor to the late, great Don Young. who understands the importance of resource development. With Alaska's engagement at both the state and federal levels, we've got opportunities to collaborate and get creative. Add that to the federal government's growing support for domestic critical mineral development. Next slide. And you can see there's a strategic element supporting the why behind G1. It's about all I can say this morning, but I want you to watch this space. I go through all of our project catalysts, our government support from Alaska to Washington, D.C., our location on Alaska state land with no federal permitting exposure, our world-class resource based on a tiny fraction of our deposit, the strong relations G1 has built with local and regional Alaska communities. Next slide. And our major milestones. Our accelerated progression to our feasibility by the end of this year, thanks to our DoD grant, and our plan to accelerate our synthetic graphite production at our Ohio facility. All of that helps to explain how well-positioned G1 is for the transition taking place around us, because it captures the why that drives us forward. The fact that graphite is indispensable to the technologies transforming the 21st century. From mining to refining to recycling, Graphite One is going to provide the US's first full advanced graphite supply chain. It's a good place to be in a tech-driven economy, pushing to a net zero future. The world needs more graphite, and the US needs Graphite One. Thanks for your time today and for this chance to share our G1 story. I look forward to the discussion and welcoming you as investors in G1 as we move forward together.
Thank you, Anthony, very much. We did have a few questions, as I mentioned earlier, from some investors that signed into this, so we're going to address those now. If you're listening to this live, obviously this is a pre-recorded because Anthony's we had a scheduling conflict for Tuesday. But if you do have any other questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and we will be sure to get the answers for you or get you in touch with Anthony after this so you can have all your questions answered. But part of your Iowa announcement here earlier started talking about the synthetic side. So is this taking away from your focus on the natural graphite and the Graphite Creek project? Like, how do those two align with each other?
Sure, it's actually in Ohio.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. And we might go to Iowa one day. You never know. But no, not at all. Actually, we've been looking for ways to innovate on the traditional linear time frame of developing a deposit and that processing the material and selling into the market. And we're capitalizing on two factors is how we've gone on this, is the common battery chemistry for anodes that uses both natural and synthetic, and also the strong market for graphite of both kinds. So by starting with synthetic anode material in Ohio, we will begin generating revenue even as Graphite Creek moves through the permitting. That's a strong position to be in, as anyone who has developed a mine will tell you, that you can't control how long the mine takes, but you can control how long you can build a manufacturing facility and get into production. So over the next 3 years, we see ourselves being in production and producing IRA compliant synthetic graphite for key EV end users in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Can you actually walk through the difference between the natural and the synthetic pricing differences, benefits, and the benefits of using both or blending, just to give a little background on that?
Sure. I mean, it's actually very, very proprietary. So it really depends on the end user. Even an end user does not disclose what proportion they use for natural and synthetic. But I will tell you that the majority of them use a blend. So they use both synthetic and natural, and some are even blending a little bit of silicon up to anywhere in the 6 to 8% range. So the natural obviously comes from natural graphite, and the synthetic is derived from different areas, but pet coke is one of the major users that are derived from the synthetic side.
And is there pricing advantages for using natural or synthetic, or are they blending it just so they get a more consistent material bottom line? Like they'll always blend synthetic, you think?
I think so. I think right now it's about 60-40, and we're told that it could go down to about 50-50.
Mm-hmm.
Right now it's roughly 60% synthetic, 40% natural.
Yeah. Okay, so you did discontinue agreement with Sunrise. What can you
Hmm.
say about like your Sunrise in China, sorry. What can you say about your partners in the anode processing technology?
Sure, sure. Well, okay, so in context, I want to underscore the one point that you'll see is obvious but often overlooked. The US hasn't mined graphite since 1991, which means graphite mining stopped before Bill Gates, Steve Jobs revolutionized the microcomputing, before the public internet, before cell phones, before EVs, and a whole host of everyday applications that we have now, which is pretty dramatic when you think about it. And when
Yeah.
you don't find a resource, you lose more access to a raw material. You lose the knowledge base for processing that material into advanced forms. And the material scientists who worked with that material, engineers who designed it, since there was no ready supply. So US really lost all of that and at a time of tremendous technological innovation. Most of that specialized knowledge migrated to China. Graphite isn't alone. It's the same for rare earths, for gallium. Maybe that's why the Department of Defense designated graphite and others as DPA Title III, essential to the national defense. So G1 is putting together a processing team with a technology licensing agreement that will be IRA compliant for tax incentives. We're also likely to involve a US national lab as well. We'll have more on that to announce. So again, stay tuned.
Hmm. What for our listeners, I know what it is, but for what's a IRA compliant?
So that just came out last year, and
Yeah.
really what it's doing is it's really letting the North America markets know that the U.S. government wants to see a U.S. supply chain. So what that means is that everything that we produce needs to be done in the United States.
For the tax incentives.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and then you got your $37.5 million grant from the DOE.
Right.
What about the DoD? What can you tell us what can you tell us about your work with the DoD?
Sure. And that is, so we've received two grants in the last 12 months, both of them from the Department of Defense.
Okay.
One was for $37.5 million, and that is for our feasibility study. And the other one was for $4.7 million. That was for foam suppressant. And, what we can tell you is that we report regularly to the DoD according to their protocol for both of our projects. And both of our projects are on time and on target. You'll appreciate we can't and won't comment beyond that. But as G1 has publicly identified the accelerated feasibility timetable in our DPA grant, I can say specifically that we are on track for completing our feasibility by the end of the year. And we see both of these grants as validators of G1's complete US-based supply chain strategy. And you won't be surprised to hear we will continue to engage the US government at all of the highest levels with every relevant agency and department.
Mhm. When you put out your pre-fees there, huge NPV,
Yes,
um, based on about 50,000 tons a year. Is that correct?
right.
Okay.
Correct.
Based on your industry knowledge, like how
Yeah.
quickly could that be soaked up in the market? 50,000 tons.
I think you're going to see us in our feasibility that comes out later this year, that number will be dramatically increased. And I think you're going to see where anodes move towards production over the next 5 to 7 years. The US is going to need in excess of 1 million tons a year, if not 1.5 million tons a year by 2032.
Okay. So there's no problem soaking up that supply.
No, no.
It doesn't sound like.
No,
Um,
we're never going to be able to provide really what's going to be needed. China is just that much far ahead of all of us. But I think what we'll be able to do is build a US supply chain that will be able to really help soak up a lot of the required amount of anodes that are going to be needed over the next 5 to 7 years.
mhm, mhm. So when it comes to financing, you're actually going to be financing in two stages for sure, right?
Yes.
Your plant in the States, and then you'll be doing another financing down the road when you have cash flow from that to build the Graphite Creek. Is that basically the big picture plan?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it, Arlen,
Mhm.
is the way we've built this business plan out is from the synthetic side first over the next 3 to 4 years, building that out. We're starting with 25,000 tons as we just released. And right now that sells for anywhere from $7,000 to $8,000 per ton. And so you'll see that we're going to move from 25,000 tons up to 100,000 tons quite dramatically as the market demands. And I think you're going to see the revenue increase dramatically and allowing us to be able to help finance the build out of the mine site as well.
Now, you can go after different types of grants for a mining project specifically, correct?
Correct.
Right. And then there's different types of grants for, excuse me, for processing plants and recycling plants specifically, correct? So
Correct.
I'm going to assume as a shareholder, and yes, full disclosure, I am a shareholder, that you're going to be going after as many of those as you possibly can.
I think it's fair to say that we are going to be and are potentially engaged in all facets of the grants processing side as well as the loan side under the Department of Energy. And we will definitely be partaking in anything that United States government comes out to help build the U.S. supply chain. They've been incredible to Graphite One to date, and we work very closely at the highest levels throughout the United States government.
Yeah. So I'm just going to ask you a personal question. What keeps you up at night on this company?
I think one of the things that keeps me up at night is just the relationship between the United States and China. And, but one thing I always come back to is the realization that China is first and foremost focused on business and relationships. And I think that the fact is they've spent roughly $130 billion building out their supply chain for lithium-ion batteries since 2009.
Crazy.
I think that's something that we all need to realize and get our heads around that
And how much has the US spent?
I don't know to date. I would probably, it's less than 10
Not a
billion.
lot.
No,
Yeah,
no.
not a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, it's probably a lot less than that. I mean, what's been rolled out. But, the fact is remain that they are a lot farther ahead than we are. And at the same time, they're business people and they see this as an opportunity to understand that we're never going to be at their level right now. It could take us 10 years or 15 years. But in the meantime, they have the technology. 98% of all anodes are coming out of China. And there is zero commercialization of synthetic anode and natural anode in North America. And so our goal is to be up and running here over the next 2.5 to 3 years, producing commercial synthetic anodes.
Yeah. So you might have addressed this, but I'm a little curious. All that technology is IP and protected on how they make the processing the anode. So how do you get a proven technology over to the United States without that technology risk? If it must be some sort of agreements and still be compliant with your IRA.
Right. Well, in the way that we're doing that is compliant with IRA, compliant with CFIUS, compliant with Treasury, and we're putting together a technology licensing agreement with a potential partner here. And in order to do that, everything needs to be produced in the United States under the IRA. So they will have zero equity, zero board position. It's strictly just a technology licensing agreement.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Anthony, thank you so much. Always good to see you. Love the shirt. You look great.
Thank you, Arlen.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Appreciate your
Thanks so
time.
much. And again, as you're listening to this was pre-recorded. And so if you do have any questions for Anthony, please put it in the Q&A box and we will be sure to get you an answer and get back to you. But again, thanks, Anthony. Have a great day. And thanks for coming back to the show.
Thank you, Arlen. It's been an honor.
Take care, buddy.
Take care.